Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome back with me, Raihan Sultan, and in today's video, we are going to dive deep into one of the most common debates in programming. So, um, yeah, why is C significantly faster than Python? And I will talk about it from OS level comparison. And this is not just about raw numbers or benchmarks. So there might be a deeper reasons behind it. And today we'll break it down step by step using real world analogies, technical insights, and so on and so on. And of course, in OS level explanations. And we will run some real benchmark tests and explore how memory management, function calls, and CPU execution differ between the two languages. And we will get to discuss another else in this video. So by the end of this video, I hope everyone will have a clear understanding of why C outperforms Python and when you should choose one over the other. Okay, so let's get going. So the most common question is Python really slow? If it's slow, why is it so? So, um, before we jump uh, into the technical details, so yeah, the short answer is yes. So compared to C, Python is significantly slower in many cases, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because Python was never designed for raw speed. Python is meant to be easy to use, highly flexible, and great for quick development. That's why it is so popular for data science, machine learning, automation, and web development, etc., etc. But when it comes to high performance applications like operating system, networking, embedded systems, or game engines, C is the clear winner. So now let's not just assume Python is slow. We could actually prove it with real benchmark. Okay, as a note, this whole presentation and article is actually inspired by the video on the right side by XMDI channel. It is actually very funny. Summary at the end is really funny, so you guys better check out. I'll put the link on the description later. Okay, so yeah, let's get to the benchmarking. So how slow is Python if we see it from benchmarking C versus Python? So on the screen, you can see that I made two programs. It's actually two identical programs written in C language and Python language. So I made a simple benchmark test, and in these programs, we will count prime numbers up to 250,000 in both C and Python language. Specifically, the programs they are check whether a number is prime using a function, and then they count the number of prime numbers up to 250,000 using a loop, and then they will print the total count of prime numbers found within that range. And as we can see on the right side, there are the execution time comparison. The top is the result of the C language, which is already compiled, and the bottom one is the result time of Python. As we can see, the C language result in around 0.012 second, and while the Python language it finished its task within 0.261 seconds. Yeah, that is more than 20 times slower. But why does this happen though? Um, Basically, the both programs run the same program. Maybe there are a couple of differences, but uh, mostly they are the same programs. So we will get into it after this. Let's get into the first explanation. We will try to compare it based on execution model. I made some comparisons on the left. So if we see from the execution type, the C is compiled first, but the Python is interpreted. So on the OS level impact, the C runs directly as machine code, while Python runs inside an interpreter, which adds extra layers. So, but how it runs? In C, we compile to binary before execution, while in Python, we interpret it at runtime. It is resulting in Python increased runtime overhead due to bytecode translation and interpretation. And if we see from the startup time, the C is instantaneous, aka direct execution, but the Python is relatively slower because Python interpreter must start first. It is resulting in Python requires loading dynamic libraries before execution, which adding OS overhead. But what is it actually? Yeah, I will start over. So C is a compiled language, which means that before we run our program, we use a compiler like GCC to translate it into machine code, which is a format that the CPU can execute directly, while Python, on the other hand, is interpreted. That this means that when you run a Python script, the Python interpreter reads your code line by line, converts it into bytecode, and then executes it inside the Python virtual machine or PVM. This thing, this extra layer of processing adds a huge amount of overhead and is one of the main reasons why Python is slower than C. As you can see, there is a diagram on the right side. Okay, so let's get into the next thing. We will evaluate it from memory management perspective, which is static versus dynamic allocation. I made three classifications here. The first one is from the memory allocation. In C, it is manual, static, and static allocation, while in Python, it is automatic and dynamic allocation. This resulting in Python relies on OS memory management more heavily due to dynamic typing and garbage collection. And from garbage collection perspective, in C, there is non-garbage collection because it must manually free memory, while in Python it is automatic via reference counting and garbage collector. This resulting in Python has extra CPU cycles spent tracking memory, while C directly allocates and frees memories. And in heap usage, in C, it has minimal heap usage because most variables are stored in stack. While in Python, the heap usage is extensive because objects are located dynamically. This resulting in Python has extra CPU cycles spent tracking memory, while C directly allocates and frees memory. Um, so yeah, in C, memory is manually managed. This means you have to allocate and free memory yourself using functions like malloc and free function. This gives you fine-grained control over memory, and there is no background process slowing things down. While Python, on the other hand, it uses automatic memory management. It has something called garbage collection, or commonly known as GC, which constantly checks for unused objects and removes them. What is the problem here? So the garbage collection adds overhead because it pauses execution to clean up memory. This is another reason why Python programs can be significantly slower than C. So as you can see on the diagram on the bottom right, so after object is being discarded, before we get into the next one, there is some kind of delay which is, yeah, a bit consuming time. Okay, for the next, we will be looking from function calls and loop execution overhead. So why C loops are faster? If we see from the function calls in C, direct function calls inlined by compiler, while Python is interpreted function calls with extra lookup overhead. And in OS level impact, Python function calls involve dictionary lookups and stack frame management, making them much slower. And in loop execution, in C, it is optimized with loop unrolling and bench spread, while in Python it is interpreted one iteration at a time. This resulting in Python loops are more CPU intensive due to runtime type checking and function overhead. So yeah, in C, function calls are directly compiled into machine instructions, meaning there is no extra processing required. But in Python, function calls involve dynamic type checking, stack management, and bytecode interpretation, which slows everything down. Loops are also much slower in Python because every iteration requires type checking. C, on the other hand, executes loops at full CPU speed without any extra checks. So, for example, uh, on the script in the script on the screen for E, it can range 1 million. Python must check every I type at every iteration pass, while C doesn't need to check types every iteration, so it executes loops much faster. Okay, now let's get going to the next. The next one will be system calls and OS interaction. C talks directly to the OS, while Python does not. So um, from two classifications that I made in printing output, in C it is it is using direct system call, while in Python it is high level or more like high level function, which in OS level impact, Python's print function incurs more OS overhead as it performs additional processing before calling the syscall to print text. While in memory requirement classification, in C, it is using explicit malloc or free, while in Python, it uses automatic memory management. This resulting in Python makes frequent memory allocation or deallocation requests, which causing more OS interaction. So yeah, in C, makes direct system calls. For example, when you use printf function, it directly calls a low-level system function, which is write syscall. You can see um, on the diagram on the screen, which is extremely fast. Python, however, it wraps system calls inside multiple layers. When you use print function, Python processes the data first, formats it, and then finally calls the system function. This extra processing adds even more execution time, making Python significantly slower when performing I/O operations. And perhaps more example, if we trying to print in Python, print hello world, in Python, it must check the type of hello world and then it format it into printable object, and it will call multiple internal functions before sending it to the OS. In contrast, C's printf function directly interacts with the OS, making it much faster. Okay, to summarize, why does C is faster than Python? I will try to elaborate from the table first. The first one is from execution model. C is faster because C compiles to machine code running directly on the CPU, while Python is slower because it requires an interpreter, adding extra overhead. In memory management, C is faster because it uses static allocation and minimal heap memory, and in Python, it is slower because it uses dynamic allocation with garbage collection overhead. In loop execution, C is faster because it compiled loops run at native CPU speed, while Python is slower because um, it interpreted loops check types at runtime, which is adding CPU cycles. In function calls, it direct execution with minimal overhead is the reason why C is faster, and Python is slower because extra function lookup and stack operation in Python itself. From system calls category, C is faster because it's direct syscalls like I mentioned before, printf, and Python is slower because Python wraps syscalls with extra processing, which is making them much slower. So yeah, from the table we can classify it into several key takeaways. The first one is C is closer to hardware, so the OS does less work to execute the program. Python is dynamically managed, requiring more interactions with OS memory allocation and CPU scheduling. And in compiled binaries in C, um, it minimizes system overhead, whereas Python scripts require interpretation at runtime. And in the next key takeaway, OS allocates CPU time more efficiently to C processes, while Python incurs extra scheduling overhead due to interpretation. So yeah, so to summarize, C is better when it comes to performance, memory efficiency, and direct hardware interaction. But Python is better when it comes to flexibility, rapid development, and higher level abstraction are needed. So yeah, those are the reason why Python is slower, but as we know, each language has its own function and you can use it whenever you need them. So that's all from me oh yeah, for more detailed explanation, you can read it on my Medium. There's a link on the bottom. I'll put the link on description later. So yeah, that's all for the explanation of why C is faster than Python in OS level comparison. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. See you later.